Good afternoon. This is Transportation Committee Chair Deb Barber. It is Monday, April 12th, 2021. Before I call the meeting to order, I'd like to say a few things about how we'll conduct this meeting. I want to acknowledge that COVID-19 is causing us to alter our usual practices. As we know, Governor Walz has declared a peacetime emergency in response to COVID-19, and the Met Council has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person committee meeting for reasons stated in the Governor's emergency executive order. Accordingly, Met Council members will participate in this meeting by phone or other electronic means, and this Transportation Committee meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. Before we call the meeting, or before we start the meeting, we need to establish whether there is a quorum. With that, Jenna, can you please call the roll?
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. And Barber.
Here. With that, I call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee meeting for April 12th, 2021. Our first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions, we can just move ahead to approval of the minutes. All right, seeing none, the agenda is approved. For approval of the minutes, we're looking at approving the minutes from the March 22nd, 2021 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions to the minutes? Seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I motion to approve the minutes to Sterner.
Motion by Sterner, is there a second?
Fredson, I'll second.
Seconded by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Aye. This is aye
Fredson.
by Chambliss.
I got you, Councilmember. Thank you. Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, the minutes are approved. Our next item is our TAAC report. I saw David Finley here today.
Hello, just starting my video and my unmute. Chair Barber, council members, thank you very much for having me today. Couple updates. I can keep it short again. At our last meeting, we got updates on the blue line and the rush line. We're liking the fact that the blue line is a go again, and we got some different proposed routes going on through there, and we're looking forward to having some input from the disability community on some of those routes as things get more solidified. One thing that the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee is looking forward to doing ongoing is to build relationships and also knowledge between different departments in the Met Council and our committee, is to have sort of like short department maybe introductions from different departments throughout the Met Council. I introduced the idea to our committee members on last Wednesday, and they like it so far. So I think we'll have our first update from transit-oriented design TOD folks come June, since our May agenda is already full. So we're looking forward to building closer relationships with Met Council departments, letting them know who we are, letting our committee members know who they are. We also have been going through some minor updates to our webpage on the Met Council's website, including our founding statute, also some other statutes in state law that pertain to the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee. We also welcomed Councilmember Sterner. I think it was your first meeting last month. It was good to have you there. Thank you for joining us. And we also had a legislative update, which we like getting legislative updates. We realize this session's a little strange given COVID, but Brooke Bortson did a great job of letting us know things that were going on at the Capitol that involved transportation. And we had some input for her as well. That is all. I'm happy to answer questions, and thank you all.
Thanks, David. And questions from council members? Then I just have a quick comment. I'm really happy that you're reaching out to get informational presentations and introduce yourself around the council. I think that so much of what we do is interconnected between different departments and even within transportation, but it doesn't necessarily all that work happen in a silo. So I think the more people that are aware of the work that you're doing, the more you'll be able to, they'll know to reach out to your committee for input and guidance. So I'm really glad to hear that. And if you need any help with anything, just let me know. So
Thank you, Chair. That's precisely why we're doing it. Thank you very much.
perfect. Thank you. All right. Seeing no other questions, we'll go on to other reports. We have MTS Director Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Updates last week, we sent out our newsletter to our Metro Mobility customers, and a couple of things to highlight in the newsletter. The first was really good news. We're announcing the availability of online booking of trips for customers and caregivers of Metro Mobility service. This is the ability to book a trip without making a phone call to our customer service center. Been probably our top priority among our customers. It's so much more convenient and time saving for them, especially if there's long waits for demand on the phone. We successfully piloted with some members of TAAC and some customer base. We felt it was ready to go, and it's rolled out well last week. And after it was announced in the newsletter, we're seeing really strong customer response to this and booking of trips in just the first few days of availability. So that's really good news. We have had online booking in the past, but it's been several years. We had some issues with the system. We had to turn it off, and so it's been on our biggest priority, and we finally got through the technology barriers recently. So that is good news for our customers. The second major update we provided to Metro Mobility customers is that we will be returning to shared rides on May 1st. So since the beginning of COVID, we've had all the tried to minimize contact between customers. So we had solo rides where we take them directly from their origin to the destination. And we'll be returning to what is the normal service of shared rides. So we wanted to let them know that another customer might be picked up during their trip. We are going to limit it to 2 customers or 2 people on the vehicle. Prior to COVID, we would allow more than that. But it's gradually, we thought we needed to return that for a few reasons. We feel we can safely provide that and still provide social distancing. Also, a lot of the vaccines are rolling out, and then our demand is returning and our capacity is starting to be constrained. So we're moving to that system that we had all along told the customers that we would eventually move back to shared rides. And so now it's the time to start that on May 1st. For service, Metro Mobility ridership is now at about 60% of pre-COVID levels, and our healthcare essential worker trips on Metro Mobility are at about 50% of the peak levels. So that both of those are fairly stable in the last couple of weeks. Along with Metro Transit, we will be offering free rides to for Metro Mobility customers who have signed up to receive the COVID vaccine at the new Minnesota State Fair FEMA vaccine site that is opening this week. So we'll be working on that. We're also adding a shuttle bus that our contractors will provide to connect to the routes on A-Line and Route 84 that serves Snelling Avenue, and then connect over to the vaccine site. So that customers will have real good connection from the bus stop on Snelling over to where the vaccine actually takes place on the state fairgrounds, to make it as easy and convenient as possible for people to get the vaccine. We are also working with metro counties. We've let them know that if they have sites where they need transportation for a group of residents to get a vaccine, they can contact us. We provide a bus to provide that service. So far, these requests, we are getting a few per week from various counties. for doing the coordination of this. And generally, these are transportation from senior living facilities where we take a group of maybe 5 to 10 seniors to a vaccine appointment in that county. So that's been working very well. And then lastly, just as the curfews that will be implemented tonight, we will be doing some adjustments to Metro Mobility Service, which is a 24-hour service through much of the area that where curfews were announced, where we kind of scale back. We don't provide any new trip requests for that during that time, and we're making contact to customers to make sure that that their trips that will occur would be meeting with the essential worker trips or other trips that are allowed during that time. And so there's phone calls being made as we speak for trips, but we will continue the service throughout the night. Just maybe a few rides that will not be made during that time. With that, Madam Chair, it concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Are there questions from council members? I just have a quick comment. I'm really excited to hear about the online booking for Metro Mobility. That is definitely something our customers have been looking for, and glad to hear that you vetted it with some people and it's going well. So that's really good news to hear. All right, next we're on to Metro Transit General Manager Quistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll first just mention that I know we're all thinking about the tragic event of yesterday with the officer-involved shooting and the death of the individual. That affects, certainly that community affects all communities, affects our employees, affects our customers, and it's just a difficult thing for everyone to work through, and we're working through it here as others are working through it in their own places. Nick mentioned the curfew tonight, and I thought I should let you know what we're doing with the curfew tonight. The message, I'll just read the message we're sending out to customers as we speak. The Metro Transit customers, the governor and local officials have announced a 7 p.m. curfew across Hennepin, Ramsey, and Anoka counties that will be in effect until 6 a.m. Tomorrow, April 13th. Metro Transit will continue to operate bus and train service for passengers traveling to and from work and those who are seeking care or fleeing dangerous circumstances as outlined in the curfew order. Customers should not travel for other purposes. And this is being sent out through social media. It's being sent out through our rider alert and our website and just all the traditional means that we get urgent information out there. Of course, we'll be running all our service until there's a reason we can't. But we are again asking individuals not to ride transit unless it's absolutely necessary to get to and from home or to flee a dangerous circumstance, to and from home and work and flee a dangerous circumstance. So that's where we're at this evening, and we'll try to alert folks if that situation, alert you if that situation changes for us. I have a few other items I wanted to bring up. They seem to pale in comparison, but I'll just give you our update on COVID. A total of 401 employees who have tested positive for COVID since the start of the pandemic. Since our last Transportation Committee meeting, we've had 7 employees test positive for COVID, and we're not experiencing any operational impacts as has been the case for some time. We did increase the vehicle capacity limits on March 25. We met with the Minnesota Department of Health to discuss capacity limits on vehicles and our essential trips only messaging. That we wanted to have this discussion because of the governor's turn of the dial kind of created some practical issues for us in terms of maintaining our limits. And based upon that health department guidance, the MDH did support us increasing capacity to 50% of the vehicle capacity. Previously, we were at 25% of vehicle capacity. The capacity was increased on April 7th, and that means that 40-foot buses can now carry up to 20 passengers, 60-foot buses can carry up to 30 passengers, and light rail vehicle cars can carry up to 33 passengers. As part of this change, though, MDH did emphasize the importance of continuing to wear masks and social distancing aboard vehicles. So we're doubling down on those messages, and we've shifted away from a message that transit is for essential trips only, and moved to a message that encourages and requests riders to travel responsibly. With respect to efforts to vaccinate our employees, we continue to encourage Metro Transit employees to get vaccinated, and we continue to connect them with opportunities. Planning continues for a possible on-site clinics during the week of April 19 to help employees who have not already been vaccinated. Then also, I'll just mention that Metro Transit has reached the agreement with the state to provide free downloadable passes, as Nick mentioned, to people who register for appointments at the state fair site. So I think I'll end with that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, General Manager. Are there any questions from council members, comments? Okay, seeing none, then we can move on to our business for the evening. There are no items on our consent agenda tonight, so we'll start with business item 2021-66. It's amendment for contract of lease space for the St. Paul Transit Service Center. We have Nick Eull and Kevin Davis.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Nick Eull. I'm the Senior Manager of Revenue Operations here at Metro Transit. And I'm going to introduce you to Kevin Davis, who's going to present business item 2021-66. Kevin is the acting supervisor of our Transit Service Center and has been for the previous 6 months. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kevin.
Hello, Madam Chair, council members. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Thank you. As Nick said, my name is Kevin Davis. I am the acting supervisor of the Metro Transit Service Centers, and I'm here to talk about business item number 2021-66. The proposed actions are that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute the Sixth Amendment to continue CAA-13P075 with the U.S. Bank Center LLC for a 3-year lease extension of Skyway level storefront space at 505 East 5th Street, St. Paul, Minnesota, 55144, in an amount not to exceed $97,100 to include rent and supplementary cleaning and maintenance costs. Metro Transit has had a presence at this location in St. Paul for nearly 33 years. Our location is familiar to our customers. We provide a retail outlet and transit information to our St. Paul customers, including issuing and reloading go-to cards, helping customers register for the Transit Assistance Program, otherwise known as TAAC, providing route information, and other questions that customers prefer to ask face-to-face. We also have a ticket vending machine located right outside our store in a convenient Skyway location that allows customers to recharge their go-to cards without needing to interact with another person. The service center did just over $650,000 in sales in 2019, but as I mentioned, our role goes well beyond just selling reloadable transit passes. The service center is located within close proximity of the Green Line Central Station and other key bus stops. With the help of the council's real estate department, we did look at a couple other locations in the area to ensure that the proposal received to remain in this location was fair and reasonable. Based on an analysis of locations and costs, we feel this price is fair and reasonable. This 3-year agreement does not include any price increases over our current rate, and the 3-year option beyond the main agreement includes only a price increase of 3% per year, should we choose to execute at that time. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair and council members. I will take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Sterner.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Barber. My question had to do with, and I know it's going to be a lot less, but what was the 2020 amount of revenue in 2021, or is it like zero because they haven't been officed at all in the unit? And that, can you share that?
Sure. So what we're looking at in 2020 was just under $200,000 in sales, which is roughly an estimate of about 29% of what we saw in 2019.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-66.
Cummings moves approval.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second?
Fredson will second.
Seconded by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin, Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, next we're on to business item 2021-80. It's purchase Farebox transfer tickets, and we have Dennis Dworshak and Abdul Ahmed.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Committee members, my name is Dennis Dworshak, Manager of Revenue Operations. I'd like to introduce Abdul Ahmed, Supervisor, Revenue Collection and Processing. He will present business item 2021-80. Abdul?
Great, thank you, Dennis, for that introduction. Madam Chair, Council members, my name is Abdul Ahmed, Revenue and Fare Collection Operations for Metro Transit. We will be presenting business item 2021-80. It's a request to award and execute a contract 20P305 with Electronic Data Magnetics to supply magnetic transfer tickets for use by Metro Transit customers in an amount not to exceed $568,000, $568,620 over a five-year period. A quick background of this project: Metro Transit has used transfer tickets for over 30 years, and using pre-COVID numbers, we use approximately 320,000 magnetic transfer tickets per week in general service. Additional amounts for special events, including some provisions for regional providers. Transfers are issued from and validated on bus fare boxes. This is what they look like, our transfer tickets. Drivers issue transfers upon request after a valid fare is paid in the fare box. Transfers allow customers to complete their trips if taken within 2.5 hours of issue. An invitation for bids was advertised on January 14th, 2021. On February 16th, 2021, a public bid opening was facilitated by procurement. We received 2 bids opened out of 9 plan holders. Electronic Data Magnetics, EDM, was the lowest respondent with a contract price of $568,620. The bid is right in line with our CIM estimate of $650,000. EDM is also the incumbent provider. Southland Printing was the second bidder with a submitted price of $1,458,000. They also did not submit bid security, and they were consequently also deemed as non-responsive. Based on these results, Metro Transit Revenue Operations recommends approving a 5-year contract to Electronic Data Magnetics for the purchase of magnetic transfer tickets for a total cost of not to exceed $568,620. With that, Madam Chair, Council members, this concludes our presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Very good. Thank you, Abdul. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm always curious when there's a discrepancy in the bids like this. First of all, there are only 2 bids and it's nearly triple. What do you have any idea how the second bid got to be so high? I mean, it takes staff time. Bidding on these projects is not free. And so to have such a huge discrepancy, is there misunderstanding, or what do you think the reason? Do you go back and talk to them, or sort of how do you assess the difference between the 2 bids?
I can answer that. Madam Chair, council members, we did look at that, and in our estimate, there are a couple different reasons why the bids could have been so different. One of them is the number of contracts per vendor right now varies widely compared to what they used to. And then also the profit margin, and then also some of the material costs. Some of these vendors had a lot of material on hand, and they can bid accordingly. But new materials, especially during COVID, is hard to get, and certain products and certain materials are really difficult to get right now. And so that might be some of the differences in bids that we have right now. We also expected a few more bids from the vendors in the past that have bid, but they didn't bid. I think probably for some of these same reasons.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I had the same question, and as I suspected, it was related. It may have been related to material costs. I'm wondering. I'm looking at this from the standpoint of competitiveness, and if a person or organization is bidding and they haven't done this before, then they would maybe have more equipment or material costs than an organization that already had those things in place. So if that is a common gap, that is something for us as policymakers to think about in terms of infrastructure and how to have more competitiveness or kind of have more of a level playing field when it comes to bidding. The second question that I have is, well, the first question, I guess the other one was a statement. I didn't quite hear what you said was missing in order for the bid to be rejected as non-responsive. Can you state that again?
So what was missing was the bid. It's a bid security that the vendors have to provide. That was not submitted by Southland Printing. And
Is that like equity? It says, I mean, is that like collateral, I mean?
I believe so, but I can definitely look into it. It's something that's provided, actually reviewed by our procurement department. They need the bid security, but I can look into it and get back to you.
I think
Sure.
Jody's on the line. Jody, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. A bid security is something that's required and essential, and it's considered part of the responsiveness check. So did they complete all the forms? Did they sign all the appropriate areas of documentation? And a bid security is also part of that, where if it isn't provided as part of a bid, then they are not allowed to proceed in the process. And so it's responsiveness. Did they complete the forms? Did they include all the required documentation? And then we go to responsibility. Have they done this work before? Can we quantify references? Do they have the equipment and the capacity to complete the work? So it's a two-tier approach, but responsiveness, where they didn't submit the bid security, is the reason why they weren't allowed to participate further with the evaluation.
Okay, yeah, I'm wondering if there's a connection between, I mean, if the requirement is to have all the equipment there, is there a way for you to look at their bid to see if the equipment purchase was part of the bid? So it's kind of a catch-22 situation if that's the case.
Madam Chair and committee members, I can't answer to what equipment was required in the bid. I can defer to the project manager for that. But that's not something that we look to with being qualified as responsiveness for this type of bid. So I'll defer that specific answer with the scope to the project manager.
Yeah, go ahead, Abdul.
Yeah, Madam Chair, council members, I don't think we require any equipment. It's more of a product that we're purchasing, as far as whether the manufacturer, the printer in this case, have the right equipment is beyond the scope, I believe. Am I right, Dennis? Did you?
Yeah, Madam Chair, council members, that's correct. We're only purchasing in this contract, we are only purchasing just the magnetic paper transfers, and that's all we're purchasing in this one. It's good to mention that EDM, Electrodata Magnetics, has been the incumbent bidder for the last couple contracts, so they're very aware of what we need, and they probably have some efficiencies in their operation.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing, hearing none, I entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-80.
I'll make a motion to approve the item. This is Sterner.
Moved by Sterner, is there a second?
Coming seconds?
Seconded by Cummings, is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin, Barber.
Aye, with that, the motion carries. Thank you, Abdul and Dennis and Jody. Next, we're on to business item number 2021-81. It's about Robbinsdale Transit Center lease agreement, and we have Claudius Toussaint here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. My name is Claudius Toussaint with Metro Transit Office of Engineering and Facilities. This business item is to request that the council authorize the regional administrator to execute a lease agreement with Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority for property that is adjacent to the Robbinsdale Transit Center in the amount of $688,857.12. Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority owns property that is immediately west of the transit center, referred to as the subject property in the attached exhibit. Metro Transit has been leasing that property since 2005 for parking, bus access, off-street transfers and layovers, and also on-site bus circulations. However, the lease has expired and Metro Transit staff would like to renew it. The proposed lease is for a 20-year term at an annual rent of $32,047.42 for the first 3 years. However, the rent may increase every 3 years thereafter by a percentage equal to the percentage established by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Consumer Price Index. At a proposed lease rate of approximately 27 cents a square foot, the price is considered fair and reasonable when compared to other council leases and in the best interest of the council. With that, Madam Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Claudius. Are there any questions from council members? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-81.
Motion to approve by Chambliss.
Moved by Chambliss, is there a second?
Second by Sterner.
Seconded by Sterner, is there any other discussion? Seeing and hearing none, Jenna, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin, Barber.
Aye, with that, the motion carries. Thank you, Claudius.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we're on to business item 2021-85, a same week item. It's the Metro D-Line Station Shelter Contract Award, and we have Shahin Khazrajafari here.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Our request today on business item 2021-85 would authorize regional administrator to award and execute contract 19P385 with Dugard Industries Incorporated for the fabrication and delivery of station shelters for bus rapid transit BRT, and enhanced bus stops at a cost not to exceed $2,225,987, with options for future purchases. The shelter is a key component of the BRT station design. In addition to providing protection from the elements, it includes additional amenities such as heating, seating, light, security, and it also provides a higher quality service. The base order for the new 5-year contract includes 78 shelters. 60 shelters are for the D-Line BRT. 8 shelters are for enhanced bus stops along Lake Street and Hennepin Avenue, and there are 10 spare shelters as well. The future options will be for up to 200 additional shelters, and they will be exercised throughout the 5 years with varying quantities and delivery schedules. The request for proposal for this contract was released on December 8th, and one proposal was received on the due date of January 12th from Dugard Industries Incorporated. Upon review of Dugard's proposal by the evaluation panel, it was concluded that the proposal had the best overall value and quality for the project and would be recommended for award. Again, the proposed council action in business item 2021-85 would authorize the regional administrator to award and execute contract 19P385B with Dugard Industries Incorporated for the fabrication and delivery of station shelters for BRT and enhanced bus stops at a cost not to exceed $2,225,987, with options for future purchases. At this point, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions on this business item.
Thank you, Shahin. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, can you explain to me the enhanced bus stop amenities for Hennepin Avenue? What's going to be enhanced and what's it going to look like?
Yes, Madam Chair and Councilmember Chambliss. I will just briefly talk about the enhanced bus stops. The amenities will be very much similar to what we have at our D-Line stations. At this point, however, they are not used. They're used for regular bus lines. I see that Katie Roth is also online, so perhaps I'll pass it on to her for additional details on that.
Sure thing. Thank you, Chair and Councilmember Chambliss. Yes, to just build on what Shahin had mentioned, these are stops that are being upgraded through our coordination with the City of Minneapolis as they rebuild Hennepin Avenue downtown. We're planning ahead and thinking about how we can both support the needs that are out there on Hennepin today, but then build toward the future with the E-Line project that will eventually serve that corridor. And so these will be enhanced bus stops with a lot of the same features as BRT until they are upgraded into full BRT shelters with fare collection and other equipment that's needed for BRT operations as we advance the E-Line project.
Awesome, thank you. I'm really excited about the fact that I see 2021 for this D-Line project. So thank you for the work.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2021-85, same week.
Motion to approve.
Motion by Chambliss. Is there a second?
Coming seconds.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? All right, seeing and hearing none, Jenna, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Ferguson,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez, Sterner,
Aye.
Zirin, Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much to Shahin and Katie. So I think we're done with our business now for the day. I believe that the first three items can go on consent to the full council. The fourth one being a same week item, we'll have to move non-consent to the council if everyone agrees. All right, sounds good. Now we're on to information items. Our first information item tonight is shared mobility program and pilot update. We have Meredith Kotka here. I will get better at saying your name, I promise.
No, it sounded great. Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. And I believe they're pulling up, thank you, Greg, the presentation now. Again, my name is Meredith Klikotka. I'm the Shared Mobility Program Manager for Metro Transit. I'm in the Strategic Initiatives Division. And if you want to go ahead and advance the slide, Greg. I'm here to talk to you today, provide just an update on Metro Transit's shared mobility program overall. So I was brought on about 2.5 years ago to lead this initiative, and we're at the piloting phase, so this is a really good time to check in. We will also be going over some project-specific updates, so some of the pilots that we're launching for this year, including one that you've already heard about, but we have a lot more details on, the North Minneapolis Microtransit pilot, and then one that is brand new that we just kicked off a few months ago, which is the Mobility Hub Planning Guide for Local Governments. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start here because this is the regional context that Metro Transit's work in shared mobility is happening in. So this is a front cover of the Shared Mobility Action Plan. This was an action plan that was funded through the McKnight Foundation and really jump-started the discussion for shared mobility off in our region. It was developed by the Shared Use Mobility Center out of Chicago with input from a lot of stakeholders, both involved in the operations of shared mobility, but also the planning and the city and county side of things. It did some really important things, including establishing some overall goals. So the ones that you see on the slide there, I'm sorry if they're a little too small. The first goal was shifting households from single occupancy vehicles towards transit and shared mobility as the region grows. And so they did put a specific number on this with a goal of 50,000 vehicles off the road in 10 years. So that would be by 2028. And then the second goal was really focused on equity. So how do we ensure that our shared mobility programs serve the same user base that makes up our public transit system to make sure that shared mobility services work for everyone? So that was a really important aspect of this plan. It also had 10 recommended actions, and I won't go over them in detail here, but needless to say, the recommended actions really reflected that shared mobility is not the work of one entity, not just the Met Council, not just Metro Transit or the cities. It really kind of crosses DOTs and transit providers and private entities. And so that was reflected in one of the recommendations to create a local collaborative to facilitate work across these different organizations. And if you advance to the next slide. Thank you. That led to the formation of the Shared Mobility Collaborative. So some of you may be familiar with this. We've been operating for about, I would say, 1.5 years. It was a direct result of kind of that overall action plan. It involves public agencies and vendors and community members. This group is managed by the University of Minnesota's Center for Transportation Studies, and it is also funded through McKnight for the past 1.5 years, so as part of a project award. The mission here is really fostering that collaboration among government and nonprofit and the private sector to expand our multimodal and shared mobility services. Obviously, there has been a lot of growth in the past 1.5 years in terms of these services. So they've been really effective in that. And some of the activities that you may be familiar with this group happening is quarterly convenings. So we used to draw about 100 people to our in-person quarterly convenings. Now we are much reduced since we've gone to digital, really more in the 40 or 50 to 60 range, I would say. But we've covered topics like microtransit and data privacy and sharing. which is a big topic that drew a lot of regional interest that was hosted at the University of Minnesota. I'll just put a plug in. We are having our next quarterly convening on April 27th. The topic is going to be COVID recovery in shared mobility. So what do shared mobility systems throughout the region, what kind of numbers are they looking at, and what are ideas moving forward into this new reality, and how shared mobility can still provide travel options for our region. Some of the other activities that this group works on is white papers. So selecting topics year to year that really need research to advance ideas across shared mobility for things like data or regional governance, and working with either University of Minnesota researchers or outside researchers to cover those topics and provide some expertise in guiding white papers. And then the other piece of this I want to highlight, one way this group has been really effective is fostering that collaboration to put in joint funding applications. So many of the active steering committee members that you see there on the right have successfully put in, whether it's through regional solicitation or through some of the MnDOT competitive funding, been able to advance joint projects that have been successful with funding. So that's a really kind of tangible outcome for this group. As you can see, we do set guidelines around how many government versus research versus advocacy and service providers. So it is a pretty balanced steering committee. We are also actively seeking steering committee members right now. So if anyone is interested or knows someone who might be interested, let me know. Next slide, please. So some of the highlights, both from our steering committee members, but other just regional projects that are happening around shared mobility. Many of you are probably familiar with the city of Minneapolis's Mobility Hub pilot. This pilot has been running for 2 years. The city's approach to mobility hubs was really neighborhood-based. They were really looking at how are residents accessing from their houses and homes and neighborhoods the transit system or some of the other shared mobility systems in the area. And so the blue boxes that you see there are modular. They can provide seating. There's also some visual improvements and plant life and amenities. This has been funded, the Mobility Hub project was funded this year for the city through MnDOT, through a competitive grant. And I just want to highlight this because they've had a really innovative approach to facility management, as well as community engagement. So the city has engaged community-based organizations to really maintain those facilities. Since those boxes can move, sometimes they do end up in the right-of-way or in bus shelters. So that has been one way to get the community involved, but also pay them for that service. So if you can go to the next slide. So the next project I wanted to highlight that you all are probably very familiar with, this is the City of St. Paul and Our Cars project on the electric vehicle mobility network. So this is a system of electric vehicle car share. It was funded through the regional solicitation, of course, but also through another variety of sources. That regional solicitation award really kind of brought a windfall of funding for them. They were awarded a Department of Energy grant. They are working with Excel to deploy this really huge network. This is a major investment in electric vehicle infrastructure and will definitely shape the shared mobility network throughout Minneapolis and St. Paul for many years to come. I got some clarification. I know there are questions on this map from the website. So the orange dots that you see there, those are actually current Our Car stations, so where you can pick up a vehicle today. The stars are a result of the past about 1.5 years of engagement work that will be future stations. And as many of you might be aware, the Our Car system is going to be undergoing a name change. So you might recognize it. It's going to be called EV Spot and EV Car Share. So Spot are those locations where you can charge your own personal electric vehicles. Implementation for the system will begin this year, so 2021. And again, another really innovative approach to community engagement. So they have just completed a report of their findings of doing community conversations and really dedicated workshops over the past year and a half. And I believe that's available on their website. So next slide, please. Some other regional project highlights. Many of you probably have already seen some of them out on the streets, but bike share and scooter share are currently launching. I think some cities are actually accepting bids right now, so that continues to be a part of the shared mobility landscape. Obviously, these are agreements with by cities with private operators, but they get lots of use across the system, as I'm sure people have seen. Some other microtransit services with Southwest Prime, that's a very well established, has been running for a number of years. It is a point-to-point microtransit service, as is MVTA, which launched, I believe, in the past 12 or 14 months, that have been running for about the past year, another microtransit service. So the last two to highlight are really MnDOT led, and I think really interesting projects, very big implications for the rest of the state actually. So the first one is their Mobility as a Service project. For those of you that aren't familiar, Mobility as a Service is really about the idea that you should be able to plan, book, and pay across providers to make your trips. So whether you want to switch from a bike share or book an Uber or a Lyft or take a transit vehicle, that you should be able to do that from kind of one consolidated app. And so MnDOT was awarded a very competitive federal grant by the FTA to provide the baseline statewide architecture for this type of service. They are just kicking off now. Their pilot implementation is southern Minnesota. So they are looking at some rural and small urban systems, I would say, in southern Minnesota for setting this project up for statewide implications. And then the last one is the picture that you see to the right, which is a rendering done by some consultants for MnDOT. It is the redesign of the ABC ramps into mobility hubs. So this has been many years in the making. MnDOT is really looking at how do you turn a parking facility, if you're all familiar with the ABC ramps, a true parking facility into a true multimodal hub. So how do we support bike share and transit and other services through there? So they have been spending the last 2 years piloting, really looking at space activation and improved wayfinding to demonstrate what works in those spaces, because they were not structured to be this. Now they're kind of moving from that pilot and more tactical urbanism approach to some major capital projects. And that's what you see in the rendering on the right. One of those capital projects involves the B ramp redesign. So that's where we have transit buses running through, we have customers waiting there. It's really a space that they're looking at, how do we improve the wayfinding from the target center station and improve the customer experience over there. So next slide, please. So what are we doing on the Metro Transit side with all this shared mobility? Now that you've heard about some of the regional partners, one of the first things that I did when I came on staff was convene a group discussion around what do we want shared mobility to look like at Metro Transit and how do we want to support it? And really the result of those discussions was a shared mobility strategy document. It was developed with staff input across Metro Transit and Met Council, frankly, because like I said, shared mobility crosses lots of boundaries in that aspect. We came out with an overall program goal of enabling people to travel without the need for a personal automobile. So how are we supporting true multimodal trips on our system? And that really fell into two buckets. you know, in thinking about how we leverage the new shared mobility concepts or services, you know, we're talking about both how do we connect to the shared mobility services that exist. So for example, how are we supporting the first last mile scooter trip to our bus stop or to our LRT station? And the second bucket was how are we providing shared mobility services ourselves? And that really comes into the microtransit pilot that I'm going to be talking about a little later. So next slide, please. Thank you. The document included about 30 different strategies. Lucky for you, I am not listing them all here. We narrowed it down, which was hard work, to kind of the top 7 to focus on for investment. And that's really over the next 3 to 5 years. So we had to ask ourselves, what are the critical first steps in supporting a shared mobility system as a transit agency? And that's really where these top 7 came in. As you can tell, I won't read each of them out, but you can see them there. Each of these are not specific to a department or even to an agency. And I really think that speaks to shared mobility. It requires strong coordination across the region and across all of the departments, even within Metro Transit. So, an example of that that's a good one, I think, is the data privacy and data sharing standards. So obviously that's something that impacts, you know, across the Met Council, but also other agencies, and has statewide implications because there is lots of state law around how we establish data privacy as it relates to transit service, but other things as well. So next slide, please. So one other, the last critical piece of our internal strategy that I wanted to highlight, because it's what led to the funding of the pilot projects that you're about to hear, that I'm about to go through, is the investment priorities. So it's great to narrow it down from kind of 30 strategies to 7 kind of first moves. But one of the most critical statements in the strategy is how do we prioritize what we're investing in and where we're investing. Obviously, Metro Transit serves a huge territory and different land uses and different populations. How do we decide what goes first? And these were the 3 kind of top tier investment priorities that we thought both supported the goal for the shared mobility program, but also the agency goals and what we're investing in. So the first one, I'm going to go through all 3. The first one is really investing in shared mobility services in areas close to or connected to high-level transit. So really there, we're looking at how do we build on what we've already invested in the high-frequency system across the region. So thinking the 0 to 2 miles outside of the BRT corridors, for example, or the LRT corridors, to really capitalize on that high-level service. The second is increasing mobility choice. Technology-enabled, you know, constantly evolving transportation options are really increasing mobility choices. And so how are we making sure that our low-income areas, our BIPOC communities, people with disabilities are benefiting from all of those investments? And additionally, looking at areas that can be difficult to serve, so high needs areas, but that might be a lower density than our existing high frequency route system. And lastly, we're looking at incorporating shared mobility where land use supports high density places with frequent service and or TOD investments. So this is really saying where we're making those major long-term investments, let's support shared mobility in those places that we know are going to generate some major demand. And you know, I bring these up on the investment priorities, both because they led to the pilots that I'm about to go into, but also this is a really important aspect of the council. So if we go to revisit, you know, these are our first couple pilots in the past 2.5 years. Once we see the results of how everything's performing and have better direction and understanding of some of the results of those pilots, this could be an opportunity for revisiting these investment priorities and an opportunity for really restructuring our investment approach based on how things are performing. Next slide, please. So we've been really busy in the past 2.5 years. This work spans many departments and many different directors were already doing work related to this. So some of this is just captured here. I won't go into detail on each one of them. I'll just highlight two on here that may be of interest. So one is the data privacy and data sharing standards. This is becoming pretty critical work and is actually something that was taken on by the Shared Mobility Collaborative overall. So they started a data sharing subcommittee that was convened in 2019. Obviously, COVID kind of put the brakes on some of that subcommittee work, but I anticipate that that will pick up again. And so there's a lot of interest now that we have tons of operators in the shared mobility system across the region at how are we making sure that personally identifiable information is protected? How are we making sure that that information can be shared across agencies are some of the things we're looking at. And then the next I'll highlight is the maximizing travel options through shared mobility and TDM. So there's a very close relationship between shared mobility and travel demand management. They're one and the same. And one of the ways that we can look at this that MTS is actually working on is how do we reimagine van pool to really be technology enabled and a lot more dynamic to serve the needs that it might not be meeting right now. There's a lot of innovation in that sector. And so that's another kind of aspect of work that's going to be happening over the next year. Next slide, please. So into the 7 first moves, the first project that you probably saw on that list, or I think it's maybe the third, investing in mobility hubs. So next slide. You may be familiar with the term mobility hub. There's no universal definition, but we did set a regional definition through the collaborative. And that is a place where people can connect with multiple modes of transportation. And then there was very much a focus on the user experience. We want to make it safe and comfortable and accessible and convenient and reliable and all those things. But a key element here is really integration of modes. So essentially you're providing a space that is a physical integration between modes, and you can see some picture examples there. I don't believe any of those are US-based examples. Actually, I know they're not, but of what they could potentially look like. This idea is really taking off across the country, and obviously there's a lot of work happening around this locally. Next slide, please. So some of the progress that we're making on mobility hubs at Metro Transit, we've really gone through some internal planning to define and articulate what Metro Transit's approach is to mobility hubs. What do we see as our mobility hubs on our system? What do we see as future mobility hubs? You know, how much space could potentially be given to other modes? How important is that to us? So those are some of the questions that we're tackling, we're kind of talking through and tackling right now. We have made a commitment, so the capital improvement program, that second bullet point there, that there is a financial commitment to mobility hubs over the next 5 years. So we are going to begin to make some basic enhancements and investments to what potential hubs could be across our system. And that work is starting this year as well. And then the last piece here, we have just started work on the Mobility Hub Planning Guide for local governments and transit agencies. And go ahead and advance to the next slide. And we'll go into that project in particular. So this is a really interesting project. It came out of a regional mobility hub workshop that was hosted in St. Paul in about 2018 or early 2019. We had about 60 or 70 participants. It was hosted by the city of Minneapolis, St. Paul, as part of their American Cities Climate Challenge grant, the Bloomberg grant that both cities were working on. Both of those grants defined mobility hubs as a key characteristic of kind of the transportation future for both cities. And in there, we learned that people really, really wanted some regional consistency in locating and defining what hubs were. And so that's where this project work comes in. The project goals are really to, provide that consistency and define what hubs are and identify them throughout the system, but also to inform project selection and strengthen funding applications. We know that we've seen a couple of these types of projects come through regional solicitation. So this is, the idea behind this is that it can support some of that work and bring some consistency to it. So we have a scheduled completion date of December of this year. Some of the deliverables in the project are looking at different mobility hub typologies. So, what's the difference between a neighborhood hub like Minneapolis is looking at and a regional hub like the airport or Union Station, those regionally significant hubs. So both defining it and saying kind of what modes go into each of these hubs. Another critical piece of this work is the mapping analysis and project list. So we have hired a consultant to specifically take all the data and look at how are we selecting and identifying these and turning each of those types of hubs into a project list, just for reference for some of the agencies that are looking to potentially do this and invest in this kind of work. As you can see, there are a lot of project stakeholders involved in this. I think we had overwhelming interest. We have about 30 plus people on the stakeholder committee. We kicked off a few weeks ago, had some great participation. So we know there is very much an appetite for this across the region. And the idea on this guide is it will help frame future investments and policy decisions on how we want to approach mobility hubs. And really aid in that decision making around what type of hubs do we as a region want to invest in. So this is really just a first step here. And with that, next slide, please. So the second pilot project for tonight is the microtransit pilot in North Minneapolis. I know I presented on this back in the fall. If you could go ahead and next slide, please. But I just wanted to give a reminder because it's been a while. For those of you that aren't familiar with microtransit is app-based, kind of real-time demand responsive transit. So the way it works for the user is similar to Uber or Lyft. So you pull up an app and you request a trip through the vehicle, and you either kind of wait where you are, or if the app tells you to walk a block or two to meet the vehicle, you do that, and then you get to complete your trip and get dropped off at your requested location. So it has a much more personalized feel. There's a lot of benefits to it. It is real time, so you don't have to book trips in advance. It is app enabled, so you're actually able to see where the vehicles are that are picking you up and estimated arrival times. And the idea is it's a lot more dynamic than some traditional fixed route or on-demand services. So it's dynamically generated routes or schedules or pickup locations, which really improves the user experience. Just two more items to note here. The technology is always managed by a private entity. So transit agencies themselves don't run the actual software that routes the vehicles, although transit agencies do work on the operation. So they do operate the vehicles, but not necessarily the technology. And then the second is it is a multi-passenger. So for those of you that have taken, say, Uber Pool in Chicago or Lyft Line, or had the opportunity to do any of those services, it would operate very similar to that. So you are potentially picking up multiple passengers on your trip. Next slide, please. So here's our project area for this pilot. Again, I know I mentioned it in the fall, but This is a collaboration with Ford Mobility and Transloc, which is the microtransit software provider, which is a subsidiary of Ford. So they're kind of our partners on this project. The project area itself is about 2 square miles. That is a draft map. We actually will be including a drop-off in Theodore Wirth there, so there'll be some slight adjustments to this map as we get closer to launch. The goals for this project really relate back to the investment priorities that you saw earlier in the presentation, expanding mobility choices, especially for low-income areas and communities of color, and then expanding access to high-frequency fixed route and transit ways. So in this instance, we are actually going to be running a first last mile service, which is the first time that's happened in the region. So MVTA and Southwest Prime currently offer point-to-point, which is in a given zone, like the one you see there, a vehicle would pick you up and drop you off anywhere in the zone. This is much more focused in that your pickup or drop off has to be related to the stations that you see in yellow there. So the C line station, this is specifically how do we provide first last mile services to and from C line stations. We are also considering adding an additional station that you see there on the right that would be Plymouth and Emerson. That would be the Route 5. So future BRT station, but currently just servicing the Route 5. Next slide, please. So some details on the service design and operations. As I mentioned, this is a first last mile service design. Our launch date is mid-October. So we are going to begin outreach about 2 months before the service. So mid-August, we will also do a website launch at that time and begin community engagement and information meetings at that point. The station and stop serve, you see them listed there, Penn and Olson, Penn and Plymouth, and the Route 5 connection to be determined, although we should know in the next couple weeks. We're very much trying to match C-line service. So in terms of days of the week, so we will cover 7 days a week, and the service hours are going to be very comparable to Metro C-line within what's possible given the budget and the fiscal constraints we're working in. But it will very much match C-line service so that people can rely on it the way they can rely on the C-line. The pickup and drop-offs will be adjacent to C-line stations, but not exactly at the stations themselves. This is we don't want to cause any operational conflicts with the BRT system. So we opted to kind of have adjacent pickup and drop-offs, but trying to minimize the walking distance required to connect to C-line. Some other major decisions here, one was fares. So we determined the fares are going to be the same as the existing bus fare, and that normal transfer rules will apply. So users won't be paying anything additional to ride this service, and we are going to be accepting TAP cards and student discounts on these vehicles. In terms of how many vehicles are going to be out there, we will have max of 5 vehicles in service with 2 spares if anything goes wrong with those vehicles. And as with fixed route service, the number of vehicles is going to vary by time of day and demand and ridership trends. So you can expect to see that. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. So this is just a little bit more detail about the Ford Mobility Partnership and the Transloc contract. I mentioned in the fall, this is a Department of Energy grant actually for microtransit research and pilots that was awarded to Ford Mobility. The innovative kind of research aspect of this project and why it's, as you can see up there, I put cutting edge. This hasn't been done before, so they are going to be connecting their Transloc software, which is the routing vehicle technology, to our GTFS real-time systems on the C-line. And that is so that they can get the user to the C-line station in time to make their transfer. And so this is the first time they're designing the software. It's been designed, so we're going to be testing it in a testing environment here in North Minneapolis. There's a lot of benefits of doing this partnership with Ford. So some of them I have listed up there. They're actually providing great technical support in terms of survey, a 600-person survey that happened kind of last summer or early fall, simulation work, which has really helped with the service design, and evaluation of the pilot. So those are all kind of part of the contract there. Additionally, we received TransOak support and software for the 12 months of the pilot, so mid-October of this year to mid-October of 2022. And that is complimentary. That is part of the research grant, which is really important and also helps contribute to the direct funding that we will be receiving through the grant, which ultimately cuts the entire cost of the pilot to about 1/3. So lets us really run for a full year and see how this service operates. The one aspect that will be kind of competitively bid will be the pilot operations. This is a partnership with MTS and Metro Transit, so we have been working side by side on this project and the launch. So expect to see an operations RFP out here in the next probably 4 to 6 weeks, and that will be for operations for the year. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Meredith. Do we have any questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Sterner.
Yes, I have two totally unrelated questions through the presentation. The first one I'm wondering about is like your partners. You don't have Dakota and Anoka County, the only two of the 7-county area, not partners. Can you give any reason why that's the case?
Are you referring to the Mobility Hub Planning Guide for Local Governments?
Yeah, like the fifth slide back where you show your many partners going, and on the right side, there's the third from the bottom. Show the counties that we're partnering with you, including the different areas, but not those
Yep.
two counties.
Sure. We haven't, I didn't receive any outreach from the Dakota or Anoka, but they would be welcome to, we just had our first meeting if they wanted to be a part of that larger group. We really put together some of the stakeholder committees together with MTS as part of folks that have expressed interest or submitted funding applications. So if there is interest in looking at mobility hubs and how they could work in Anoka and Dakota, absolutely, they could be part of that.
Okay, very good. And then my second question has to do with your microtransit and your last part of your presentation with the vehicles. And I'm kind of wondering what kind of safety and risk management are you doing for personal safety and for the property safety of the vehicles? Is it cameras? Is it lighting? That type of thing, monitoring?
Yep, good question. They will have cameras on there just like regular transit vehicles. So I didn't include the full slide, but there's lots of equipment on these vehicles. It's both going to have what is traditionally on the Metro Mobility, but as well as what's on our buses. And so the primary form will be cameras as well as the fare boxes that have an emergency call button.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from council members? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, this is really cool. So the micro transit, no, I get that, I'm getting the terminology wrong. The transit hubs. I'm looking at the pictures, I see bicycles and then the electric vehicles and some other buildings. Were you planning to have like a place where they can get some water or refreshment, or what are those other buildings there, or any kind of pop-up stuff? Or I mean, my brain and my imagination is kind of going here.
Yes, thanks, Councilmember Chambliss. That is absolutely what is part of the Minneapolis pilot right now. So the Musicant group has been doing activation of those spaces, and one of the things that community engagement is, the community has explained to the project leads. These need to be places where you can rely on water. These need to be social spaces and activated through commercial activity. So whether they're, that's either vending or in-person commercial activity, those are all really important. There's lots of things you could pull into mobility hubs, as you identified. These are very social spaces, and that's how they're intended, and to be really active spaces. And that sometimes means staffing, depending on the space.
Awesome. And then my other question was with the app, the handheld app, if there is not a vehicle available within the network, are the users able to transfer funds to, like say, a regular Uber? Because I'm thinking there are times where people, they got to get to where they're going, and if they're trying to use it real time, there may be not enough options for them, and we don't want people stranded or late.
Yeah, great question. So thanks, council member. The app actually won't collect any money. So we will be doing fare collection through our normal Metro Transit bus system. So there will be an onboard Farebox. So they'll pay once they get on board of the micro transit vehicles, or they'll show the driver their ticket if they have opted for a mobile ticket. But the actual micro transit service is not, the microtransit app, so Transloc, isn't actually going to collect fares. So they won't need to verify or validate until the vehicle actually arrives.
So they're going to be, at least initially, located where there's alternate transportation, correct?
So they're going to be floating throughout that 2-mile zone. So people have a number of ways they could pick up a vehicle. They could request it through the app. They could use a call-in number, kind of like they do on Metro Mobility now, and they can dispatch a vehicle if they don't have access to a smartphone. Or if they see a vehicle at one of the C-Line stations, they can flag it down and get a ride to their final destination, and the driver can just enter their final destination.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, additional questions or comments? I just have one a comment. I love this stuff. Meredith knows that. As we talk about things like mobility hubs and some of the microtransit projects, to me, it's really an opportunity for communities to set up spaces that really function as social spaces and connect to the community. I think it's an opportunity for us to be really creative and to think about how we can do things better and getting people to where they really need to be. So I'm really excited about all of this, and you're welcome to come back and talk with us anytime, Meredith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. All right, next we are on to our last topic. It's about the regional solicitation. We have Cole Hineker here. He's going to talk about the unique projects development process.
Thank you, Chair Barber. I am Cole Hineker, Multimodal Planning Manager for the Long Range Transportation Planning Division here at the Met Council. This last conversation was actually a very good dovetail into this conversation. You heard a lot of references to the regional solicitation. We have been funding projects out of the regional solicitation that don't really fit some of our basic funding categories, and many of those have been shared mobility, although not all of them. And so this conversation will, hopefully the previous conversation will have stoked some additional feedback and questions for this conversation. Next slide, please. So for those of you who aren't familiar, a reminder on what the regional solicitation is. The regional solicitation is our process to allocate the federal flexible formula funds that come to our region from the federal government that are specific to transportation. And we generally in this region have chose to fund locally initiated projects that support our regional goals and objectives in the transportation policy plan. Just to give you a sense of the scale, there's about $200 million worth of money available every 2 years to fund these types of projects. And we generally are looking out 4 to 5 years. So projects that are, that are in the development process, but maybe haven't been fully designed yet, to give the projects time to work through that process. It's generally a lot of construction projects. And so just as an example, you guys as a committee, actually, you approved the 2020 regional solicitation projects earlier this year, and those projects were all scheduled for construction or development in 2024, 2025. It's a very elaborate, transparent, and technically driven process to select regional solicitation projects. We have, upwards of 50 folks from around the region participate in helping score applications. And unique projects, as you'll see as I go through this, is going to be different, and that's why we're really looking for a lot of input here. And then federal awards generally pay up to 80% of the total project costs. We do have adopted maximum awards. In many cases, they're $7 or $10 million. So projects that are much larger than that could get a portion from the solicitation, but certainly would need to cover the rest of the project with local or other federal funds. Next slide. We do try to link the regional solicitation as strong as possible to our regional policy. The things that we talk about as important in Thrive 2040 and in the 2040 TPP do filter down into our regional solicitation evaluation criteria and subsequently to the technical measures that we use to recommend projects and score projects. And so it is supposed to be a reflection of our regional policy to the best that we can. There's also some qualifying criteria that ask applicants to document their consistency with regional policy. In particular, applicants generally have to be accomplishing one of the strategies in the TPP, as well as a number of other qualifying criteria. TAB also uses geographic balance, how well the projects are distributed across the region, as a secondary lens to ensure that there is balance in where we're investing and that applicants are getting projects on a regular basis. Next slide. So what are we talking about when we're talking about unique projects? Prior to 2014, the TAB has always looked at unique projects that generally don't fit into their predetermined categories, things like highways or transit or bike and ped. They've been looking at those on a case-by-case basis for most of the regional solicitations history. There were a few projects that have been funded, and I'll talk about those next, but essentially they looked at adding a category during the 2014 regional solicitation development, and they actually had an application process. It didn't, I don't think it went as TAB as intended. There was a lot of confusion, I think, about what the intent of the unique projects was and how they'd be evaluated. And so that was just sort of a one-off attempt to fund unique projects. But there's always been interest from TAB as a board to fund unique projects, things that are on the cutting edge, both technologically, but also in addressing issues that maybe aren't currently addressed by the categories that we have today. And in 2018, as Meredith alluded to, we have a project called Our Car Mobility Hub Charging Stations that was a partnership with the City of St. Paul. And this really stoked a reinterest in unique projects for the TAB board. And they then had a subsequent conversation about it over the coming months after that. So next slide, please. I wanted to note too that when we did this unique projects process in 2016, there was a significant amount of feedback from technical staff, which is, in this case, the technical advisory committee to TAB is made up of county engineers, city engineers, and a number of other representatives, that they really felt like the unique projects are extremely difficult to compare because they can be dramatically different project types, with different underlying metrics and goals, and that TAAC did not have a recommendation for how to objectively differentiate projects. And so what that tells us as council staff is this isn't really a technical issue to figure out and spit out the right answer. It's an issue that needs to be driven by policymakers and their goals and desires for what they want to do. They actually didn't really feel like that unique projects should be an application process, than that anything that comes forward should just go directly to TAB for consideration, again, because the technical aspect of these projects is so different across the board. So that was some of the feedback we got that helped us understand, the technical committee's role and how they view the potential to evaluate unique projects. Next slide. Here's a list of some of the past funded projects that we've pulled out of the regional solicitation that were considered unique. A few of these you should be familiar with in terms of multiple years of travel behavior inventory funding. So the work of Jonathan Ehrlich's team and Ashley Asmus, who've been in front of you, I think a few times in the past year, talking about our travel behavior inventory. This was really funded out of unique projects because it benefits all projects for us to look at how people are traveling and understanding travel patterns. And so that was a project that was pulled out, and I think there's some kind of maybe under agreements that will be a continuation moving forward, that program will get ongoing funding out of this pot. A couple other examples though, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency has made a few different applications for vehicle technology, both to retrofit outdated diesel engines as well as to add some electric charging stations. And the most recent example, of course, was our car mobility hubs charging station. So you can kind of see there's maybe different approaches to what the types of unique projects that have been funded, what they were. Next slide. In 2018, we got a lot of feedback from the TAAC board in particular about how do we accommodate the influx of this interest in unique projects. And shared mobility was a significant part of this conversation. As you can see, there's just a lot going on in the region with shared mobility based on what Meredith just presented. TAAC's response was to try to formalize this. I mean, I guess I should say they had questions at first to try to formalize this, and they had many questions about how to evaluate it. And so TAAC directed staff to create a framework for unique projects that would allow it to be a competitive category moving forward. And so this is a big charge for us. We're going to start that in the next month or so, and that's why we're here today, primarily working with TAAC and a work group that'll be set aside. There's a couple of additional questions about how it relates to a category they have called travel demand management. They generally are funding smaller projects. I'll talk a little bit more about what those look like, but is there some overlap between that category and a unique projects category is a question they're going to grapple with. And then again, shared mobility, you've probably all heard a lot about connected and autonomous vehicles, new technologies. Electric vehicles certainly has been a hot topic of late. And again, the policy level input is really what's going to drive this. We're not going to have the perfect technical way to evaluate these. We really need to focus in on what the overall goals of the policy direction are. Next slide. In 2019, we formed a regional solicitation policymaker work group to first start to grapple with some of the questions that emerged when we were working on the 2018 evaluation of that Our Car project. That project really didn't fit into any of the categories, and it created some issues with how we were going to consider funding it or not, since it didn't fit into the categories that it both applied to and really didn't fit into any of the categories that we had in the regional solicitation. As that group formed, one of the questions that we wanted to talk about was how should we handle requests like this moving forward? And so we formed a policymaker work group in 2019. We're forming a similar policymaker work group this year, but the work of the 2019 group, which involved all the representatives you can see here, including council members Barber and Cummings, was to make some recommendations for the 2020 solicitation. Next slide, please. What they recommended was that we create a unique projects application category. It's a pretty big change for TAAC to acknowledge that this should be a category, at least for one cycle, and it's always open for TAAC to revisit that. But they set aside 2.5% of the funding from the last solicitation to solicit for unique projects. And that's about $45 million of the $200 million total. And they would actually select these projects that, again, are 2020 funded projects or 2020 solicitation projects, but they'll be solicited for in 2022. And part of the logic there was that if they're innovative and they're new, we really should be selecting them closer to the time frame in which they're implemented, which will be 24-25 time frame. And we'll use the interim time to set up the criteria and the evaluation process. And that's about what we're about to kick off, is that idea of creating the criteria and evaluation process. Next slide. So here it just shows in 2020, this was what TAAC actually adopted as a regional solicitation framework. Again, 2.5% of the funds taken off the top to fund unique projects. And then the remaining categories you can see here, things like roadways, transit and travel demand projects, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities. All of those have subsequent subcategories within them that are all project types that are eligible. And so the idea of unique projects is that's really kind of funding things that maybe don't fit into all of those other categories, and things like shared mobility that potentially benefit all modes and maybe aren't specific to these types of categories would be one of the reasons that they created this unique projects category. Next slide. Characteristics that TAAC acknowledged when they were discussing this as a group, again, I kind of talked about some of these, but that projects that don't fit, particularly projects that are difficult to score, the idea that our existing technical measures and our very transparent technical process may not be as transferable to unique projects with their unique goals and what they're trying to accomplish. Again, the immediate implementation timeline, really TAAC had some interest in funding innovative demonstration type projects, things that maybe haven't been tried in the region before, or things that are emerging as technological solutions for transportation, and ideally projects that have regional benefits and in many cases combine or cross-modal categories. So really trying to get projects that have a wide range of application and impact, but are also cutting edge and very innovative. And I would just want to acknowledge at this point that in 2019, you can all relate to the idea that that was pre-COVID, and we haven't really had a conversation with TAAC about this category since then. And so we do suspect that some of their opinions may have changed or maybe even shifted priorities some just based on what we've seen in the last few years. Next slide. So I did talk a little bit about travel demand management having some potential overlap. It's a category within the transit and travel demand management subcategory. We funded at about $7 million. Go on to the next slide. And in 2014, we established an innovative TDM category. So you can kind of see where the overlap might start to come in here. We're looking for innovation within TDM. And there's $1.2 million available there out of the $7 million total grant. The remaining $5.8 million is what we use to fund transit marketing as well as the TMOs throughout the region, 494, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Anoka. And so the 1.2 million is available competitively every cycle. Similar to what they're looking for unique projects wise, they look to fund shorter term or nearer term projects. So in this cycle, again, for TDM, we'd be soliciting for 24, 25 projects. There's smaller awards, and the minimum award for TDM is 100,000 and the maximum award is 500,000. And that, frankly, is one of the limiting factors for TDM. We're really looking at more like marketing campaigns, in some cases technology. Just one example, Metro Transit's new app was funded out of this category, but doesn't really allow for, say, investing in charging stations like the Hour Car project was looking to do. The project cost there was much higher than 500,000. And so that was a limiting factor in terms of how big of a unique project you could do within this category. But there is some potential overlap. And so that'll be an issue we'll want to address, is whether this category gets combined with that or how it relates to the other category. Next slide. These projects are a high federal priority though, and they do demonstrate, they have a very particular role in terms of air quality or congestion reduction, particularly through single occupant vehicle travel reduction. We have been able to introduce a number of concepts to the region. And generally projects, they might take an existing idea and expand it to a new geographic area, or take an existing concept and expand it to a population that wasn't previously served. And so similar to what we're looking at unique projects, this category also has a lot of qualitative assessments. There certainly are some quantitative measures here, but many of them are what are you hoping to accomplish? What are the main goals in reducing travel, reducing single occupancy vehicle travel? And so there is some similarities in terms of how these would be evaluated. And so again, important for us to look at to make sure that applicants wouldn't get confused about which project category they should apply in. Next slide. So as I said, for this year, we're starting up a similar work group to what we had in 2019. We are kicking it off on April 23rd and meeting every 2 weeks on Friday through about July 9th. At least that's the tentative schedule. We did seek volunteers from TAAC to participate in this group. We have the 2 Met Council members, Councilmember Barber and her alternate, Councilmember Fredson. There's also 4 county representatives, 3 city representatives, and 5 citizen or modal representatives who are appointed by the council. And this group will provide us with the policy direction about what are they really trying to accomplish with unique projects and some of the factors that we think should be important in terms of what types of projects should be eligible, what types of evaluation criteria do you think we should look to develop. And that'll give staff enough direction to really formulate the application itself and take the technical details and put them into practice. And so this group is going to be relatively fast-paced. We thought it would be good for you as the Transportation Committee members to get an introduction and a chance to weigh in on that, particularly to give Council members Barber and Fredson some of your thoughts going into it, because we likely won't be able to get back to this committee other than for a short update before they have kind of their formal recommendations. Next slide. And I should say that the recommendations will go to TAB itself to consider as they develop a draft regional solicitation. Much of this we've covered already. I think the considerations for the work group here are that it really would be prudent for TAB and helpful to focus on 1 to 2 goals. If you think about the types of outcomes that you're trying to fund unique projects for, it could really be across the board. And if they were able to focus on 1 or 2 goals, and I'll have some examples of that, what that might look like on the next slide, that would help us narrow down how we could evaluate the project. And again, that tells us what information we need to add in order to get enough information to be able to compare projects. We'll also need to think about what projects are eligible. Potentially, if we want to set minimums and maximums, if we want to have different match requirements than, say, some of the other categories. I know that TAB has discussed having a higher match requirement just because there's a little bit more risk associated with funding unique projects, making sure that the applicant is fully vested and has a high amount of matching funds. And then we're also trying to determine exactly what the role of the technical committees would be in evaluating proposals, again, depending on how, what the goals of the projects are. So the next slide. And this is the last slide. An opportunity to hear from you all. Really, we're gonna give this intro presentation to the work group on Friday, April 23rd, and focus the first meeting on getting input on their goals. Really starting with, what is your perceived purpose of funding unique projects? Hopefully hearing from TAB members about whether that's changed in the past year since they last met to talk about the topic. And then really focusing in on what are the goals and outcomes that they think should be a priority for funding unique projects. And I listed just a few examples here. These are not meant to skew the perspective or anything, but these are some of the ideas that we've heard come up regularly at TAB as issues of importance, as well as at the council. And then it's always helpful to think about what types of projects they'd like to see come forward as well. But really focusing in on what are we trying to achieve with unique projects as opposed to what types of projects are we trying to fund. Because the framework for not knowing what projects might come forward, if you give them a sense of if you want to reduce racial disparities or you want to mitigate climate change, then we can just kind of keep an open book for the types of projects that would come in and structure our criteria to match that. So I thought this would be a good place to stop today and hear from you all if you have ideas or questions related to how this process will move forward, and particularly feedback for council members Barber and Fredson to bring to the committee.
Great, thank you, Cole. So yes, council members, we would love to hear some thoughts. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Cole. That's a great presentation. I think this is really important. I think I like the immediacy of it rather than the long range time frame. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit, Cole, about how projects that are ultimately funded are evaluated, when and how, and to determine whether the goals that were stated were met or not, and when would that be done and so forth. But I think this is a kickoff. It seems to me, and I certainly could be wrong on this, but I mean, these are going to be new, innovative, thoughtful ideas, and they're not all going to be a success. But you know, we have to fail lots of times to be successful in achieving our goals and kind of finding our way to that goal. But anyway, can you talk a little bit, Cole, about how they would be evaluated post awarding the grants, when and how do you determine success or lack?
Yeah, thank you. Chair Barber, if I can answer that. There's two parts to that question. One of which is we haven't funded enough unique projects to really create a framework for how we evaluate those specifically. But I know there's significant interest in TAB and making sure that we do that. And so in the past, for some of these projects that are innovative, we've considered the idea of asking them for their own evaluation framework and using that as a way to score projects. Like, how are you going to evaluate yourself? So that's another approach we could take, and I would likely tie it back to the criteria that TAB says are important. You know, whether it is mitigating climate change or any of the other various goals. For the existing categories, it's probably helpful to give you all a framework that we have 9 to 10 metrics, sometimes more, for every category that we evaluate. Traffic, it's safety, how many serious injuries or deaths occur in an area, in a 5-year time frame. For transit, it's things like transit ridership, how many jobs can you access on the route. And so all of these different metrics are what we use to evaluate the projects, and we've recently started going back and evaluating the after conditions when projects are built. Again, we don't have enough unique projects to have done that yet, but that is our approach to the regional solicitation now, is to determine and look back at how the projects, how much they met their goals and how much they're doing. And part of that is to both give us input on how to set up criteria in the future, make sure that we understand what is actually doing well and what isn't, but also to get some sense for what the overall impact of this funding program is. So I could see the TDM, or the unique projects fitting into that framework, but again, probably narrowly focusing on what their goals of the program are. And asking the applicants to identify how they would be evaluated. It's often difficult to predict how to evaluate something when you don't even know what the idea is yet. But.
All right, Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair Barber and Cole. Mine has to be like projects that I was maybe looking at, or maybe a little bit more of a soft type of thing. So like, I remember one time I was in the legislature, they were looking at where there were places that there was discrimination with it, and then they went through all the different laws where there's discrimination or what have you. So mine has to do with like, I've had a couple official demonstrations on driverless vehicles, and I've had an unofficial one, and I'm seeing a vehicle that I was in recently that literally can drive itself. And I'm kind of wondering if there was more of a study where we can look at, well, where's the technology that doesn't allow us to do that? Where's the laws and the rules that allow us not to have driverless vehicles? Because I think that could really be a deal breaker when we deal with commerce and people's safety and that with driverless. Because if you even could have like no drivers that trying to get around, and you have a driverless vehicle that would take them where packages or that kind of thing. So that would be one study I'd like to see is coming back on that, as well as like the electrical charging places continue to work, like where the earlier presentation was, is like what are the locations there are. Like I have a electric vehicle, but I have a really short range. It's a Chevrolet Volt, so I have 40-mile range, But a lot of times I'm not sure like where the next spot is or what have you. There's lots of gaps in that. So if I'm just going locally, it's not a big deal. But if I start going into downtown St. Paul or Minneapolis and I'm running on gasoline, but so just that connectivity, I think, would be another thing I would, maybe want to look at. And then also wonder our own Metropolitan Council, why aren't our bus charges working, and what's keeping us from taking the plunge to go electric vehicles, and what's the gaps on that? I get that there's the gaps, we're not ready for it. I really don't have enough information why the study on that would be helpful as well, for me. So those are my ideas.
Yeah, I know that we are doing a electric vehicle study. I frankly, at the time, I can't remember if they've been in front of you guys yet, but I'm sure if they haven't, they will be soon. And so that is certainly a study we could tap onto. But the one thing you raised, it's an interesting point, and I think we should bring this up to the work group, is just the idea of maybe funding some studies that are not an infrastructure project, but something that we just need to learn more about and look into more. I would certainly think TAB would be open to that if they have significant questions about the future of something. So we can bring that point to them.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation.
Okay, how about Councilmember Chambliss? Do you have any thoughts?
Oh man. Well, I mean, I guess I just want to see how it plays out. I like, having an opportunity to try something new and see how it works and use our learned knowledge to advance. We might be surprised with what comes out, so I say go for it.
Should be interesting. How about you, Councilmember Ferguson?
I think it's I agree. We should go for it. I think that the balance often is, and we see it in a lot of our policies, right? So it's the balance between, we have limited numbers of dollars, right? So we're trying to balance between equity and, let's say, the environment. And so I think one of the things that we want, if committees or people are bringing things back to us, where is the priority with the limited dollars? Because it's easy to say we should do electric buses and spend double on buses, but are we doing that instead of being more equitable in our transit system? And if that's the case, then we should vote and decide if that's the right policy choice for us. And what's sort of the priority? Eventually, we might get to everything, but how do we prioritize when we're thinking about these things between different choices? And I think that's a great spot for people to be able to weigh in on and make those priorities and then tee up those decisions for us.
Great, thank you for your comments. So I think Councilmember Fedson and I will make sure we're Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that we are not taking money away from what we've.
Oh, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify that this new regional solicitation category is not replacing dollars that would have initially gone towards more equity. This is a new pot of money, correct?
Well, I can, speak to that. The pot of money that's available in the solicitation every cycle is a limited pot. It's a set amount. What TAB decided was to set aside $4 to $5 million of that would not be available for things like roads, bridges, transit, and bike ped, but would be identified specifically for a unique project. One clarification that I'd make, though, is TAB, they don't have to fund a project if they get a bunch of things they don't like. I don't think that that's a commitment from them, but they are saying that we are taking $4 to $5 million away from those other types of projects in order to explore the idea of a unique project in this next cycle. That doesn't mean that TAB couldn't say they want it to be a particular thing like equity or like climate change mitigation. They have the flexibility to say what their priorities are within that category. And it could overlap with what some of the other projects are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that given the way that things are structured as far as how we can approach equity, and that you know, a lot of the equity issues are due to historical racial disparities. And normally, in order to directly address that, you have to have like a mandate, or you have to focus on cities where they are impacted the most in terms of like location or space. And given that we have so many restrictions on how we can directly address those equities, I would say we need to be more intentional with the use of dollars, especially as it relates to transportation, where there have been, you know, trillions of dollars of inequities caused impact over the years. So if we're going to make some changes, I would say let's make some more changes where we can impact equity more, given that, you know, this is a small pot of money and that the issues are so large, particularly in our region. So I would be for looking at criteria that expands the opportunity to address equity issues. Now that's issues with, you know, not just racial equity issues, but whether it's issues for disability or some other groups that have historically been disadvantaged and continue to be.
Yeah, I think that's really good feedback. Right now, in most of our categories, we do evaluate equity as one criteria out of 9 to 10, and it ranges, I think, from about 5 to 15% or so of the points. And so this could be an area where they just focus more points within that category. That's an open conversation for TAAC.
Right. And I'll just say, like, when I was in those discussions where we set aside this money, and it was because so much the projects that come before TAAC are often these through the regional solicitation are really big projects or this, that, but they're not necessarily nimble or innovative. And so seeing what the needs are in our communities, I think TAAC felt a desire to be more nimble and innovative. And this work and even this conversation we'll have today will help prioritize the goals within that. I think it is a really good opportunity for us and for TAAC to try some new things and maybe be some thought leaders, and which I think is good for our region overall. But it's very helpful to kind of get all of your guys' feedback, so that, as Councilmember Fredson and I are in that work group, that we can make sure we're conveying that to the broader group as well. Councilmember Fredson, do you have any thoughts on the feedback?
No, I would just add, in earlier conversations, I think it will be important for us to prioritize, which objective really do we want to lift up when we're, measuring the proposals. And then one idea I had, I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but it was, whether or not there would be some sort of secondary effort that we could incentivize, or the specific idea was, do we sort of lift up or prioritize proposals that have support across county, that have multi-county support, that have multi-city support, or maybe even support across, council member support, whatever it is. But I think, that's just one idea.
Councilmember Barber, can I just ask one question actually for Councilmember Fredson? Is there a labor view on this automation of buses, other vehicles, just given this concern, you have a lot of good union jobs that might be impacted by, some of these trends, and how do we take, I guess, that perspective into this thinking as well, right?
Just want to say sorry, Chair, sorry about my, I just got blasted by a Ramsey County curfew alert here in my earphones. Yeah, I think that would be a good conversation to have. We could probably have a whole meeting or conversation on that subject. I know that it's been brought up at previous Met Council meetings, and there are concerns, although folks also understand progress and understand that we can't stand in the way of progress. But I think big picture there is, how do we, if there's going to be a transition, how do we ensure that folks that are currently doing that kind of work, that they are either transitioned into some other similar line of work, or how do you manage that transition is basically what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, just, I mean, again, from an equity perspective, obviously we've got a pretty diverse group of drivers. So it's just something we should probably, we just need to think about as we go through these processes. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all for the good conversation. If you have any other thoughts, definitely reach out to Chris or myself or to Cole, and we'll just try to keep you up to date. Hopefully, Cole, this was helpful for you. You've got some information to work with. Good. All right. Then if there is nothing else, thank you all for the great discussions tonight, and we can be adjourned. Have a good evening. Bye now.